While we're heating up that piece of metal to make a hammer, I thought I'd go through some of the things that I would do to get the power hammer prepared. You know, the typical things that I do before I start forging. So I don't over oil this. I mean, you don't have to oil it every day, but it's not going to hurt it if you do. So you put some on the guides. Get some in all the joints here, the pins. Inside here. Like I said, it's not going to hurt to be a little sloppy with it, although you don't want to get too sloppy, or else you're going to be cleaning up a bunch of oil. Anyway, so get a little bit of oil on all this stuff. The guides probably being the most important part. And if you want, every few weeks, you can put a little on all this linkage here. So like right there, and inside here, and up on the top, and right there. And then you can put some inside there. Down here, you really don't. Maybe on that. A little bit inside there. On the other side. And that's about it. Now I did shoot some grease inside there, and one thing you want to do is if you pump this full of grease, run the hammer for 5 or so minutes and then shut it off and clean up the excess grease, which I'll show you. Because if you don't, as you activate the clutch, what will happen is that grease gets onto the wood blocks and it glazes them over, and depending on the weather, it can either glaze them over and make them squeal or squall, or it glazes them over, and if it's hot out like today, the clutch won't engage. So I'll shut the hammer off and you can see how much grease comes out while it's running. I mean, I didn't overload this thing while I was doing it, so it's not going to be that much, but it doesn't take a lot to spill out and get on the clutch blocks. And then if you get the clutch blocks glazed over, then you have to take all these out and then grind them sand them down with your wood sander. So it's just better to get all that excess out of there before you start. Save yourself the work. There. Then I'll turn it back on. These ones here, they really don't need, the less you probably grease these, the better. They don't need a whole lot. What you do want to look for really is to make sure that all of these are tight. Make sure that's not loose. All this. These will loosen up. If you're doing really heavy forging, these might loosen up sometimes, so always keep an eye on those. And the weather can have a lot to do with the way these things operate. You know, it's hot right now, so everything's loose, but during the winter, everything tightens down a little bit. So, you know, take that into consideration also. But you don't want this ram too tight. You know, it needs to have, I don't want to say a little slop in it, but it needs to have a little give in there too. You know, what you don't want is, like, when it goes to the bottom, it's going to be hard to tell, but you can barely see this thing move, but that's okay. You know, a little bit is all right. You just don't want too much, because if you have too much slop in there, it wears the guides funny. And I've already got a piece of this guide missing up in this one, which when it goes up, if you can see this, it kind of, watch it if you can see it, it kind of falls a little bit to the right at the top, right there, and it moves over. That's hard to see, but anyway, these are loose, which I put some brass screws in here instead of riveting it, which I need to take these off, and I've already bought some new shims that I can rivet back on, but that's going to take, you know, whatever, a few hours to take these off, rivet the new ones on, and get them back up here. So I'm kind of waiting until I have a day where I'm not doing that, or, you know, working or whatever. So anyway, you know, another thing you want to do is check all these. One thing that makes a huge difference in the way that these things operate is if there is any, if any of these foundation bolts that come up through the frame are loose. Because what happens is, if these are loose, the hammer rocks from side to side, and when it starts rocking, it throws, I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but you lose a lot of power, in other words. So make sure that these are tight. That's a big thing, to make sure these things are running right. I mean, usually once a day, I'll take a wrench and just make sure. It's usually see, that one there is a little loose. I should put a lock washer on that one there, but anyway, it's usually the front ones that are a little loose. And when we poured this foundation, it's about 20 inches, which I think is more than enough. It sat on top of 4 inches of concrete for a couple of years, and to be honest, I didn't really notice that much difference between the 20 inches or the 4 inches of concrete. So I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference, but I just didn't notice that much of a difference. But it sunk down a little bit in the front here, and it buckled the corners. We probably should have put that felt in there as a barrier between the block and the concrete, but we didn't, and I'm not going to dig it out just to remedy that problem. So it's sunk down probably, I don't know, a half an inch, and it's broke the corners, but it's all right. It's not hurting anything. So anyway, the most important thing that you want when you start to run these is that a lot of things happen when you press on this pedal. You know, you have all this spring and stuff working on the pedal. Now if you walk around to the side, you've got all these linkage happening, which all needs to be tight. That's really important that all of this stuff, there's no slop in this linkage, because it'll affect the activation. The way that the hammer activates or engages when you press on that pedal. So, I mean, you've got the pedal going down, you've got this link, you've got the turnbuckle, you've got it coming up to here, you've got linkage here, 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 and there. And then it pushes back and engages those wood blocks. So take all the slop out of there. And this, to pull the yoke off of the clutch, you can put a spring in here, however you want to put it together. So when you press on the pedal and take your foot off, it pulls the yoke off of the wood blocks, because sometimes it'll stick. So it's probably better. It wouldn't hurt to, I've had a few hammers where I put the springs on both sides and connect it right there. So one is okay, two might be better. So now you can, a lot of people too will, well, I'll use this just for the heck of it, but they'll put a wood block down here. Let me get something else. They'll put a block here so they don't have to balance on one foot. You see what I mean? Where I've just been doing it forever, where I stand on one leg and I balance myself. So and then you the last thing you want to do before you start working is to get all that oil off of your dies top and bottom, because what happens is that scale is pretty hard if you're working with tool steel and not mild steel. But if you're working with tool steel, and what happens is those puddles of oil will get scale stuck in them, and then it makes little, it'll make the dies rough, because the scale actually gets pulverized and pounded into the dies. So keeping these oil wiped off is a good idea.